What the Tech is sponsored by Audible.com, the internet's leading provider of audiobooks, with more than 100,000 downloadable titles across all types of literature. For a free audiobook of your choice, go to audiblepodcast.com/Andrew.
What the Tech?
Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Andrew Zarian. Of course, I'm joined by my tag team partner in crime, Paul Thurrott. How you doing, Paul?
Pretty good.
That was a wrestling reference.
Yeah.
Tag you in.
I saw Hulk Hogan one time at the Boston Garden.
Did you?
Yep.
Was he as impressive as he is?
Yeah, actually,
on
it was really good. You know, this is a long time ago, but obviously.
I mean, when you think America, Hulk Hogan and Rambo are the two things that I think of. I mean, he has really become an American icon.
Yep.
And an American idol to many people.
He came out to Eye of the Tiger.
You know, that was his original theme.
Brief moment in, I think, Rocky III, if I'm not mistaken.
That was his original theme in professional wrestling. And then, of course, he had the I Am a Real American theme, which became his his known theme. But we're not going to talk about professional wrestling on the show. That's another show on the GFK Network. Today, we generally talk about technology and everything happening in tech, but I want to talk about Paul and his career in tech. We did this interview with Mary Jo Foley, and every email that I got was, MJ was great. Andrew, you're awful. MJ was phenomenal. You got to do one of these with Paul, because Paul is amazing too. Just go and ask him one question, shut up, and let them talk. So that's what I'm going to do today. I think we did one of these the first time I had you on the show, which was like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And I think a lot of people have forgotten about that interview. So I want to do it again because you're involved in internet broadcasting, which we'll talk about a little bit. You're involved in podcasting. You have a very successful blog, winsupersite.com, and you become a guy that I go to for information as far as credible information. I mean, I go to your website every day now, not because you do a show with me, but I've always done that. I mean, since I heard about Paul Thurrott. So I want to talk to you about how you got started in technology before I get into the journalism.
Yep.
What was your first, I guess, tech product or computer as a kid or whatever, as a whatever?
Well, okay, so I'll tell you that my first personal sort of understanding that I wanted to be part of this was I went into a Sears in Roebuck, and it was probably a Commodore VIC-20, not a Commodore 64, but there was a display for this computer, and it had pamphlets that I took one of each of, and it talked about all the little technical things you could do with it. And I remember imagining in my head this kind of game that maybe I would make that would run on this computer, which was really fanciful because the game I imagined could never have worked on this computer.
Was this it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I never got a VIC-20. I eventually did get a Commodore 64, but my first computer, believe it or not, was it was something called the Entertainment Computer System for the Intellivision. It was this thing you plugged into the Intellivision that turned it into a computer, and it had an external keyboard, and you could plug in a cassette deck to it and save and load your own programs. But you could write basic programs that took advantage of the sprites that were in the games. And so if you plugged in a game, you could rotate through all of the little characters that were in the game and find them programmatically, animate them on the screen, and have them run around. And so I wrote these simple little, game type things where it was like the Running Man from Night Stalker, and he would run across the screen, and you could control him with the controller, using BASIC or whatever. And so, really sad computer. I mean, I don't remember the exact details, but the text screen was something like 19 characters by 7 or something, and I'm sure the resolution was somewhere in the 160 by, I don't remember, 100 pixel range. It was really, really low resolution.
I mean, how old were you when you got this?
Oh, well,
let's date ourselves, Paul.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't remember. Early teens, maybe, or tens. What do we call those years? I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so early teens.
Probably less than that, but yeah.
What made you get it? I mean, at this point, computers and technology are now mainstream. You're not seeing it on television everywhere. So why did you get it?
Well, I mean, I think like everyone else who's involved with technology, regardless of what era that you grew up in, that you look at these things and you think about what you could do with it, you know. And so I always enjoyed computer games and video games and things like that and applications and all that. But I wanted to know how these things worked, and I liked that you could do that. And so the reason I got that one first was that even though a Commodore VIC-20 or 64 or whatever it was by the time the early 80s hit was relatively inexpensive, this computer thing that I got for the Intellivision was only $99. So I didn't buy it myself. I'm sure my parents bought it. But I think the deal was basically you can get this or a TI 99-4A, which would have been a better choice technically, but at the time it was being phased out, which is why it was so inexpensive. And I thought I would just get this because I like the Intellivision and I could, and I knew it would do these things.
But what was your first exposure to something like this? Like you like the concept of a video game, but what was your first exposure to something like that? Like, was it this? Yeah. I know you like a lot of sci-fi novels and things like that. Mm-hmm. Was it that kind of influence on you that like, oh my goodness, like look at what I could do with this? Like you see it on television, you read it in the books, it's happening in real life.
Right. Yeah, I can't. I mean, I'd have to really think about that. I mean, I what I can say is that in the sixth grade, I had a teacher who really kind of fundamentally changed things for me. And I had two teachers over the course of my life who had this kind of impact on me. And she taught a kind of an extra credit class. It occurred before school a couple of days a week. And over the span of that year, not outside of school, sort of, outside of the regular classroom, we read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. We read the Odyssey, not Iliad, I think just the Odyssey. And we read Beowulf over the course of the sixth grade. And we would come in, I think it was twice a week, and we'd discuss it. And you got extra credit points for participating. And in the normal English class, taught by the same woman, we had to write book reports. And so that year, a book called A Sword of Shannara, I call it Sword of Shannara. It's actually pronounced differently, like Sword of Shannara, whatever, however you say it. Terry Brooks wrote it. This book came out. It was like 700 or 800 pages long. It was an unbelievable ripoff of The Lord of the Rings. And it featured paintings in it and on its cover by the Hildebrandt brothers, who did a lot of the Tolkien calendars in the 1970s. And I wanted to read this book for a book report, but I felt like it was really long and I wouldn't be able to finish it in the time frame of a typical book report. And so she gave me two time periods to finish reading it and then writing this massive book report where I basically spelled out all of the ways in which this thing was just an absolute ripoff of The Lord of the Rings. And she gave me like a double A+ kind of thing. But I remember thinking I liked this kind of thing, that not so much writing, but just, thinking about that kind of stuff, comparing things and understanding even at a very early age what a terrible, ripoff this book was. Although, to be fair to the author, he wrote later books in the series, which were not ripoffs and were actually pretty good. So I don't remember if that sixth grade occurrence happened before or after Intellivision. I don't know, but
let me tell you, I mean that's mature thinking for a sixth grader to read a book and be like, this is a total ripoff of the other book,
Yep. Well, I was really, like many people who read these books at an early age, I was profoundly impacted by The Lord of the Rings and by that kind of thing, and I always wanted to see that thing realized as a movie, but never, knew it never could be. Although, of course, later it was. Very successfully too, I should say. And Star Wars came out in 1977, and Star Wars was that first wake-up call where something like that could be possible. And by the way, Star Wars factors into my thoughts about what this game could be. It was kind of a space Star Wars-y kind of thing. And I don't remember, so I don't remember how those things fit together exactly. But those were the the rough kind of influences. And then as I became a teenager, of course, I started reading all kinds of science fiction, Asimov, Larry Niven, and Jerry Pournelle, who I'd later got to know, and things of that nature. H.P. Lovecraft. I mean, all this stuff you would expect. Stephen King, eventually, who is to this day, literally to this very day, and I mean like today, is still an influence for many reasons as well.
My father, when I was a kid, my father was really big into, like you said, sci-fi, and Star Wars changed his entire life. He was amazed at what you could accomplish with a film like that. And My father always was interested in technology, but he was more like a gearhead more than anything else. But the possibility of what it could be was amazing to him. So when I turned 4 years old, or 5 years old, I think I was in kindergarten. I was 5 years old. My parents bought a computer and put it in my bedroom. They know nothing about computers.
What was it though?
It was a Tandy.
Oh, that's right.
They bought me the Tandy, which I still have.
This might explain your alcohol issues now.
The frustration of using a Tandy.
Yeah, because I used to hang out in a Radio Shack, and I always thought, these things were not any good.
You know what's bizarre? I remember my parents paying over $3,000 for that thing.
Oh, sure.
And to me, like a 5-6-year-old, like $3,000, like holy, like that is a crazy. It's still a crazy amount of money to spend on a computer, But I remember they spent $3,000. My father knows nothing about a computer. My mother knew like word processing, but she never bothered. I mean, she didn't really use it either. They just put it in my room. They go, okay, learn it. And that's how I learned. I mean, I self-taught myself, and I remember getting Prodigy at like 6 or 7 years old, and using it. So
also had Prodigy. Yeah.
But it was always the concept of, like you said, like this could be so much more that influenced me. And like you said, like look what we're doing now. I have a half-assed television studio in my living room. That's really what it comes down to. And the possibility of what this will be in 50 years is unbelievable.
Yeah.
But for you, it was video games. I know that you're a big video game guy now, and you play a lot of first-person shooters. Were you that interested in video games at that point, or is it something that as the video games got better, you got more influence?
I was lucky to be in the first generation of people who grew up with video games. The Atari and television, ColecoVision, all that stuff happened in the late 70s and early 80s as I was growing up. And so my dad was a guy who was intrigued by these games, but was awkward playing them. Was never going to be good at them, and it was the type of thing where he tried and failed a couple of times and walked away. Whereas, because I grew up with these things, my son is growing up now and is older than I was at that time, and we play games together and we do things together that are like that. That my dad, just because of his generation, could never have participated in, and so that I think that impacts things. And just like today, when kids grow up and there are iPads everywhere and smartphones and everything, it changes their perspective on the world. So I never saw it as a career at the time. It was just a hobby, but it was just a very natural thing for me to fall into, I guess.
But where did you see the technology going? Like when you envisioned the future of whatever you were using, right? Like
I don't think I did envision the future. I don't.
No, but like as a kid or like someone like even now, like I'll think about it and I'll say, wow, look at this laptop. What is this laptop going to be like in 20 years? Like, did that not exist at that point? Like, I think now we could speculate and we could kind of see where it's going. But at that point, I guess the speculation was like whatever was on TV or whatever was in a sci-fi film. Like, that's what the future would have been.
Well, I don't know that I ever had that kind of perception. I can say that in the early 80s, mid 80s, whatever, as I was growing up, there were different publications out at the time. You would read everything in magazines. And I remember it occurring to me at some point that what I was reading in whatever it was, we had magazines like Run Magazine was kind of a Commodore magazine, and they had like Compute Magazine, which was like multiple computers, and all these other technology magazines, which I really loved. But you could tell reading them, it would say, there'd be a little byline, a little story about Commodore. It would say Commodore today, or, whatever, did something, blah, blah, blah. And you could tell from the date that it was like 2 months ago. And I remember thinking, there's got to be a better way to find out this information. Like I was so interested in it, but it was so removed from what happened, when it happened, because of the nature of magazines. And so I think, that might have been when, it's funny because as a kid, I would read the comic pages in the newspaper at a very early age. I always loved to read. So I'd read anything. I mean, if I'm stuck with a box of cereal, I'll read every side of the box. But it might have been that realization that caused me to start reading like the business section of the newspaper, which, as a kid, you think is like the most horrible and boring part of the paper. Like if you have to go through the paper, it's like you can start with the sports and, there are comic pages, maybe you read your horoscope, and then it's entertainment news maybe, and then it's kind of downhill from there. But I sort of, the section I think I would have thought of as being the last thing to read, it quickly became the first thing that I read, simply because it was up to date and I was really interested in what was happening to these companies.
See, like, as someone that's like into Asimov and Jerry Pournelle, like, I would imagine that when you read those things, you're like, wow, this could be a reality.
Oh yeah,
like
totally.
That,
and that's why
Asimov was an influence for me. Yeah. Like I consider myself, like, I'm big on that whole futurism and a lot of these futurists, like there's speculation on what it'll be. Asimov was, the king of that.
Yeah, I think the thing that sells that stuff, it's the thing that sells everything that, like, say, Michael Crichton wrote, where he's created this plausible world. And he gives you this fantastical thing in some cases, but you buy into it because the world is so believable. Stephen King does the same thing, actually, just not usually technology related. So Isaac Asimov would have stories about flying cars and spaceships and robots, and the mathematical probability that history could be predicted, and people had tablets and phones and all kinds of things, and you buy into it because he makes it plausible. It's not like ludicrous science fiction. It's science fiction based in fact, based in science. It's science fiction heavy on the science.
Any L. Ron Hubbard stuff?
No.
One of the funniest things someone ever said to me, they go, "Oh yeah, L. Ron Hubbard. He wrote that book, Diuretics."
Yeah.
And I go, "Diuretics."
Yeah, not quite diuretics.
Not quite a diuretic.
Something like diuretics. Yeah. I think he might have been a diuretic.
So you started reading the business section because it was current and it was giving you all the information that you wanted at that moment. So how do you get it? Because I guess you went to school. What did you go to college for?
I guess you went to school.
I guess you went to school, right?
I guess yeah. So oddly enough, and it's hard to remember because this is so long ago, but for the people who knew me in school, in like public school before college, the thing they would have said to you is, I'm the art guy. I'm the one who can draw.
Yeah.
And
you could draw.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
So right. I mean, because now it's years later. So at the time, that was all I was ever going to do. Like, I was going to go into art, which, by the way, in retrospect, is ludicrous. Like, what kind of parent would send their kid down a fine arts degree program? It's like training someone on how not to get a job,
Yeah.
But I was so good at it, I never even considered doing anything else. And so
that's what you wanted to be as a kid? Like, you wanted to become an artist?
No.
I
don't even know that I should say it that way. I was just going to become an artist, And so by the time
what did you draw? Like, what kind of style?
Well, whatever. I won awards in the 12th grade. I won the Boston Globe Scholastic Art Award. I won, whatever. I mean, I was, a notable talent at that kind of thing for that age. But, I got accepted I only applied to and got accepted at art schools. And I ended up going to the Art Institute of Boston because it was close, I guess. And it was cheaper than RISD and, whatever. And it was better than mass art. But, I kind of flamed out there because of two reasons. One, I realized I could already, whatever the class was, because there are different techniques for everything, just drawing and painting, and it's abstract stuff, and it's whatever. And they, of course, had regular classes too. But I was already better than everybody who was there. I could draw or paint anything better than anyone who was there. And I was never going to get a job doing this. Like, this was a complete waste of time.
Do you still draw?
No, but if you think about the stuff that I've done on the web, I've always done, like, if you look at my site now, there are always these promo graphics and things, and that's like Photoshop and their photographs. But I always made the graphics for the site going back to whenever. I mean, for years and years and years. And I sort of continued creatively in that fashion, because I was, it's something like a lot of people, like, if you write like a tech blog, it doesn't mean you can make a graphic, that could accompany it. I just happen to have that kind of leaning, and so I'm okay at doing that kind of thing.
I'm always so impressed by anybody that could draw, because my mother could draw as a kid. I mean, I remember she would just do these unbelievable paintings and drawings, and and my father too. My father does more like comic style stuff. I can't draw a stick figure for the life of me. Like, if I were to draw, like you told me to draw a person, this is what they're looking like. If you're looking at my video, like the hands are coming out of their neck, like they just look like a scarecrow. It's terrifying, actually.
No, it's normal.
It's totally normal for a person
that cannot draw. Yeah.
How do you discover that you could draw? Like as a kid, like were you just doodling? And
so I don't really think about this stuff a lot.
I'm amazed at that.
I don't know. But I will. I can tell you this. This is funny. I might have mentioned this to you at one point because I was down in the cellar sometime this year and I saw some things that will make sense later that reminded me of this. But when I was a kid, I used to make comic books, and sometimes I would do them with friends. Sometimes I'd do them for myself. There was a teacher I really enjoyed. I turned him into a superhero character, wrote an entire very large book about him, and it was very comical and everything. And I made a copy of it and gave it to him at the end of the year. And I used to always also do these kind of comedy, like radio show things. With a friend of mine, we would make these tapes, and we would make, like a fake radio show.
Yeah. You told me that, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason that's relevant now is just that, like, I was down in the cellar cleaning around or something, and I came across those tapes, and I thought to myself, it's weird. When I was a kid, I used to write books, and I used to make radio shows. And now I'm an adult, and I write books, and I I do podcasts, and it's like it's like 30 years later, and I'm kind of doing the same thing in some ways.
You've come full circle.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, obviously now it's technology related, but yeah, I was sort of I went to college and then left after a year because I was it was bored. Confusing because I had never considered doing anything else, and I didn't know
what to do.
Then what to do?
Yeah,
And so I dropped out of that, and I got a job at the local Toys R Us, and I actually my one notable achievement there was that I very quickly moved into the computer thing they had going there. For a little while, Toys R Us actually sold computers. Like they had Commodore 64s and Ataris and Atari ST very briefly, and they were going to move upscale and do all these computer displays and all that stuff. And we would display them in a certain way, but we got these display cases, and I organized them inside so that these things were running, and they were running demos. And the guy, actually I remember his name is Ken, but whoever he was, the regional director for Toys R Us in New England or whatever, came by and he said, "What's going on in here? Like, why are these things running? Are you guys playing games or something?" And I said, "No." I said, I set these things up so they can run demos so people can come by and they can see like this animated display of what the computer can do. And he started like writing and taking notes on his clipboard and everything. And pretty soon that's what Toys R Us did in all of New England. Like they gave me like a little bonus or something, and I was running the computer thing at Toys R Us, which was really stupid, but that's what I was doing. But so so my year off from school, I did that, and then I actually met my wife there. She was in college and needed like a Christmas job, and so they shipped her up from where she lived to work in the store, and I met her, and that was that. But eventually, I didn't want to stay there, and so I got waylaid for I don't know 4 years, something. I worked in banking. I think it was a friend of a friend said I should apply for this thing, and I was a teller and a customer service rep, and I ended up doing like the commercial banking stuff because for some reason I was actually, and this is a skill I still have. If we ever go out to eat, I should demonstrate this for you. But I can count money faster than anybody I've ever met, and time goes by. Like I kind of got. I was making money, not great money, but I was, I had this job and I got married. And
I mean, you have a stable job at this point. You're doing banking. It may not be the most exciting of jobs, but was this where you're like, okay, well, this is what I'm doing. I'm making a living at this. This is the path I'm going to take at this point where you kind of.
No, because I sort of felt like at that point, life had kind of pushed me down this direction that it wasn't very interesting to me from a career standpoint. But I felt like that's what most people do. You get up in the morning, you go to a job, you're there from 9 to 5, and that thing doesn't define who you are. And so I spent a lot of the time I was there, and I was at different banks. I mean, I started in the Boston area and Bank of New England at the time, and then Bank of Boston. And I would read during off times and during breaks. I would read all these technical books. I was learning how to program first on the Amiga. I taught myself C programming, well, Pascal first, and C programming, and then C++. They had a weird C++ on the Amiga. And then eventually I moved to Windows, by the early 1990s. But I sort of self-taught using books. And that was where I ran into that book by Charles Petzold, the kind of classic programming Windows book, which, at the time was like this enormous tome. And I at some point it occurred to me, like, maybe finally, belatedly, maybe I could turn this into maybe I should do this. This is what I care about, But but doing so would require me to go back to school, and it would require some hardship because now I'm married and I've been working, and my wife had a good job, but how are we going to make this work and that kind of stuff? And so, long story short, there is just that I decided to go back to school and for computer science, and we moved to Arizona because my dad owned a place in Scottsdale. We could stay there for free, at least for a little while, and we could make a go of that. And so, 1993.
I mean, that's a big decision to make because you're kind of grounded at this point, and but you kind of realize like this is not something I want to continue doing, and you just say like, well, I'm going to start over. This is my new thing.
Yeah, and what's interesting is then everything started to happen really fast. It was very strange. It was like moving suddenly clicked. The first year we were there was a little hard. My wife did some part-time work. I ended up I couldn't get in-state tuition, and so I went to school over the summer. You can go at like a community college and it's college credit and all that, but I was going to go to ASU, and I had to wait a year to get it, to go to ASU full time. So I actually got a job at a bank, and so I was working at a bank for 1 year, and then also going to Scottsdale Community College. And while doing that, I ran into the guy who ran their computer science education stuff, Gary Brent, and there was a brief moment that first summer where I could have actually gone off and worked for some company doing Unix stuff, and that was just kind of a weird something that almost happened, but. This guy was hugely influential in my life and got me into writing about technology. And so that first year, he was going to they had done like handouts for like a Visual Basic class, and they wanted to turn it into a book. And there was a woman who was in one of my classes who was doing some tech ed on it, and she asked if I'd be interested in helping out on that, and I did. And then Gary asked me if I'd be interested in maybe writing a little bit of it. And I have no idea why he would think I'd be able to write any of it, but I said, sure. And then over time, you'd have these meetings, we talk about it, and I'd say, well, I think we should do it like this and this. And pretty soon I was just writing it. Like I was like the primary writer somehow on this book, first book,
When you went to school for programming, what did you want to do? I mean, what language, what language, what language were you learning?
Well, right. So I knew it was going to be PC based. I figured it would be, I learned, I took classes that year in C and C++. And actually, did I take one in Pascal? No, I guess not Pascal. No, we just did that on our own. But no, actually, Pascal was part of it too. Well, I don't remember the order anymore, but those were the languages. I mean, Turbo Pascal, Turbo C, and then eventually Visual Studio, which is, Visual C++, which was pretty horrible in the beginning, but and I asked Gary later, and years later, a year later, I have no idea. But after we went on and wrote many books together, and I said, Gary, I don't understand. You had no example of my writing. What would help you, or what would make you think that I would be good at this? And I'm thinking this is going to be the key insight, and this is information I can pass on to others. Yeah. And then he said, I could just tell.
I thought he was going to say I had no one else.
And I was like, that doesn't help me in the slightest. And he said, yeah, because, well, sorry, I can just tell, So there you go.
So this guy started your writing career. I mean, he based on no, I mean, example of your writing ability.
Right. He also provided me with my first formal relationship with Microsoft, because Gary had this relationship with them through beta programs through the school and through the publishing company, which back then publishing companies had pretty good early access to products, which they don't anymore.
What year is this?
93.
Okay, so this is before Windows 95 is not even...
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that following year, we wrote the book on Visual Basic 3. We wrote one on Excel. I was not the primary author on Excel. I've never really been good at Excel, but we got into some programming topics. Of course, Gary was always very interested in that stuff, and I was too. And I don't remember the timing on this, but Delphi happened, and which was the Borland kind of answer to Visual C++. We were very heavily involved with that stuff, and then by 1994, Office, I think 6, that would have been 93, but Office 6 was happening, and then Windows 4 was happening. What became Windows 95, And so we got on board to write the book, for about Windows 95, and that was a big deal. And that got us into Office 95 and into Plus 95 and into MSN, which was Microsoft's online service, and it kind of snowballed, from there.
I want to continue this now that we're at Windows 95. I want to ask you about your first impressions of it. What were you using? When were you using the Amiga? What year was that?
Yeah, it's funny. It really wasn't for that long of a period of time. In 19, I skipped a little. I did skip a little bit of my history there. In 1987, I went back to school initially, just regular degree stuff. I went to the University of New Mexico, and my dad lived out there at the time. That Christmas, our house actually burned down, and I lost at the time I had like a Commodore 64 and an incredible collection of software. I had an Okamate color printer, which kind of used these wax kind of strips to print. It was very interesting and quiet. I lost all that stuff. And so I needed to get a computer. And the following year, 1988, I went and looked. I looked at the Mac. I was very interested in Apple stuff, but it was always very expensive. And I had no money. I had no money at all. And I wanted an Amiga, but the Amigas in 1988 were not great and were expensive as well. But, however that worked out. I actually bought in 1988 an Apple IIgs.
Okay.
And the reason I bought it was because Apple had financing. It was $3,000, which is crazy. Which in today's money is going to be like $12,000. It was a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking almost the same time for me, where my parents bought me that computer. So yeah, $3,000.
I had no business buying anything like that. My choices for that amount of money were that computer or a Mac SE, which was like the old black and white style, the little shoebox looking thing.
Yeah.
And I just wanted the color. And I thought, it has the same user interface, but color. It seemed like a no-brainer. Spent a lot of time and money learning Apple had amazing developer documentation, these hardcover books, Inside Apple, I think they were called. And I bought all of those and went through all those. A lot of that stuff was in Pascal as well. And really interested in it. But I spent a lot of time and money trying to turn this thing into an Amiga. And eventually I realized I needed just to forget this and go to the thing I actually wanted. And so I sold it. And I bought a used Amiga 500 in 1990. And so I never got a nice Amiga. I had like a couple of different Amiga 500s.
I mean,
I had
the
an
500 though. I mean, the 500. I guess like in '87 when it came out, it was visually it was really pretty.
Oh no, it was a great machine. It was just, but it was the consumer price point one. It was the low end one. Like I really wanted the 2000 and then eventually the 3000, of course. Those computers were amazing. But
was that
my
the one?
Amiga 500, it looked just like that.
Yeah.
Was totally tricked out. I actually had built a little hardware switch into the middle of it where you could switch between the different ROM versions because they had like the 1.3 ROM, which was like the classic Amiga, and then the 2.01 or whatever, 2.04 version, which was kind of the new, really modern looking UI thing. And I had an internal hard drive, which was very rare for the day. And I think it was like a 20 megabyte hard drive, which was crazy. And, at one point I had like 3 different floppies connected to it. And, I tricked that thing out and loved it. But, the truth is I only really used it from 1990 through, 93 actually, because that's what it was. The first summer. Was it the first summer? Yeah, the first summer. Yeah, because it would have been Pascal. I actually took all of the Pascal classes, I did all of the projects in Pascal using a Turbo Pascal emulator on the Amiga. And it wasn't until the final project where there was some Turbo Pascal feature that this emulator didn't support. So I had to actually go to the school to use their computers. And then I said, I got to get a PC. Like, this is just, what I'm doing is stupid. And so I sold off all my Amiga stuff and went to the PC. I remember it was like 3 years. It was just 3 years.
I remember my cousin had an Amiga 1200 in the early 90s.
Love that thing.
And it was awesome. I remember using it. I was like, wow, this thing is really cool.
Yeah.
And I had my crappy Tandy.
AJA graphics. AGA, I guess. AGA. It sounds weird saying it. AGA graphics. That's what it had.
Really
somehow
cool.
I remember that for some reason.
Paul, now that we're getting into Windows,
yes.
This is the bulk of the stuff. This is what people. I'm really fascinated on people's early exposure to technology. I found that fascinating. And you know what? I had no idea you could draw. I think that's really cool.
Sure. Oh, well, why would you?
I mean, I would tell everybody if I could draw.
I don't draw anymore.
At all. Nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent thing I've drawn, and my kids used to love this. Like, you go to a restaurant and you draw like a picture on the paper placemat or the paper tablecloth they put out when you have kids.
Yeah.
And they give the kids crayons, and so I would draw some giant dinosaur thing, and then I would draw like a little teeny person with little like alarm waves coming off their head, about to be eaten by the dinosaur, and then I would draw an arrow to it, and I would say Mark, which is the name of my son, and he would laugh, and then he would like put his hand, and he would draw a picture of me being eaten by an even bigger dinosaur.
When we go out next time for drinks, can you draw me being etten by a dinosaur?
Yep.
Okay,
I'll
perfect.
put the little alarm marks on the head.
Perfect. And I could try to draw you after that. Before we go on, Paul, I want to talk about Audible.
Okay.
Audible.com. I want to thank Audible for supporting the show. If you want to try a free audiobook, go to audiblepodcast.com/Andrew. Over 150,000 downloadable titles to choose from across all types of literature. I mean, they pretty much have everything you can imagine, from comedy to autobiographies to everything you can imagine. And it's unbelievable. Paul is a huge Audible fan. So am I. My wife is even a bigger Audible fan than me. She loves to download biographies about housewives of New York and New Jersey, because that's all I see on mine. I see the Bethany book, and I see the Tori Spelling book. So if you have some sort of daytime TV show, she is buying your book. So it's awful stuff. But Paul,
too bad.
I know Paul actually gets things that I'm interested in. What is your Audible pick, Paul?
So I've been on a Stephen King thing lately, but coincidental to that is the latest. His new book has just come out. It's called Dr. Sleep, and it is a sequel to The Shining, right? Which is interesting because I was just my wife and I saw Stephen King live at some event this year, and he always tells this story about how people come up to him and they say, "Hey, what's going on? What's going on with these characters that were in The Stand? Are they okay? Are they still together? Did their marriage last or whatever?" And he always finds that to be kind of funny because it's a book.
Yeah.
These people don't actually exist. And he really hasn't written too many sequels. I mean, he wrote a book with Peter Straub that there's a sequel to, a direct sequel. And then, there's some Salem's Lot kind of mini sequels and short stories and so forth. But for the most part, he's kind of stayed away from that thing. And so this is a sequel to one of his most famous and best books. And so I was a little nervous about it. I read a few reviews of it that were pretty positive. I thought, okay, so I'm gonna read this regardless. But I've been listening to it on Audible, and actually, I think it's fantastic. I actually have. Usually, I think we've talked about this. I walk a lot around the neighborhood, and I've actually walked extra just to listen to this more. I'm almost halfway through it, but it's basically the story of the boy who was the kid Danny Torrance in the original book, The Shining, and he grows up. The beginning of the book concerns him, and so, his mother is still around, and the guy who was the caretaker of the hotel, who also has The Shining and their friends. It tells a little bit of their early story, but then it launches into a new series of events that occur when he's in his 40s, and he lives in New Hampshire. And I don't want to ruin it, but it extends the understanding of what The Shining is and how people with this thing can interact with each other. And it's just there's a lot of kind of Alcoholics Anonymous type stuff in it. Which certainly is something Stephen King has gone through, and I'm sure that's where that comes from. But it's a great book. It's I'm only halfway through, but I'm kind of surprised that something like this kind of holds up, because The Shining is 40 years old almost, right? It's got to be 35 years old, something like that. And to write a sequel to that was kind of a daunting process. But actually, I think he did a great job. So,
do they touch on like everything that happened right after? Like, do they kind of reflect back and what that experience was like?
Well, yeah. So the early part of the book is about how him and his mother kind of move on, and his mother has health problems as a result of what happened there. And obviously the kid's like emotionally scarred and all that kind of stuff. But and like his father was a drunk, and so. He becomes a drunk as well, and there's the kind of irony of that, and whether that's inevitable, and how that impacts his ability to control this special gift that he has, and all that kind of stuff. But it's I don't know. I've been reading a lot of Stephen King, or I should say, listening to a lot of Stephen King stuff this year. For whatever reason, I really like it. But this is it's a good one. It's a long story as well. I'm sure it's about 18 hours.
18 and a half hours.
Yeah. So I'm about almost 8 hours in. So.
Great reviews on Audible, actually. It's a 4.4
Yeah.
out of 5 on Audible with 142 reviews. So people seem to be really enjoying it.
Oh, the other thing I'll just add, just real quick, is the narrator, whose name I don't remember, but the man who narrates this also narrated a bunch of other Stephen King stories. And there's one that it's a novella, actually, that I recommended recently. I think it's in Full Dark, No Stars, and I think it's called 1921 is the name of it. But that may be the single best Audible reading by a single individual that I've ever read. I really like the guy's voice, and I think he's really good at this kind of thing. And he also reads 11/22/63, the JFK book that Stephen King wrote. He's just it's just kind of a good combination, and I think that helps out a lot as well.
Very, very cool. Dr. Sleep by Stephen King is Paul's pick of the week. You can get this book by going to audiblepodcast.com/Andrew. You get a free audiobook and you try it out. You see if you like it, and then you sign up for the service. I'm telling you, once you sign up, you're hooked. I have 2 separate accounts, because my wife takes one, and now I'm using the other one for myself. But it's so worth it, because if you're driving and you drive to work, you have a long commute, this is exactly what you got to do. Except for listen, you can listen to our podcast. Other than that, you should listen to Audible. Audiblepodcast.com/Andrew. I want to thank Audible for supporting What the Tech. Now back to Paul and his journey in technology. We're doing something a little different here today. Yep. We're not talking about tech news. I want to interview Paul about what got him interested in technology, what it's been like for him, because he started out. He said he was big into video game stuff. He started out with that. He kind of I didn't know you didn't go to school for any of this, and then you went back to school for programming.
Yeah, I did
initially. Yeah. You went back to school for programming. You ended up meeting someone there, and your path into writing started. And that became your career. I mean, for the most part, that has been what you're known as, a journalist, an author. I mean, it's just unbelievable how things turn really and really quickly. So now we're at Windows 95 now. We're approaching the modern PC era. We're talking about the big boom that's going to happen with the computing and the PC.
Yep.
At that moment, you're looking into this. Do you see the path? Are you saying, and I asked Mary Jo this, when the Windows 95 launched, did you say, oh my God, this is it? Like, holy cow, what a leap.
Well, just very quickly, I just step back a little bit. One thing maybe I should mention is that leading up to Windows 95, I did not have any respect at all for Microsoft. In the late 80s, early 90s, I thought that what they did was terrible, of low quality. I was coming at it from sort of a Commodore perspective, from an Amiga perspective. I thought MS-DOS was a joke. I thought Windows was a joke. I've told a story about how in the early 1990s, when I had the Amiga, my wife had an IBM PS1 that she used for WordPerfect and for writing and work-related stuff. And I loaded what I guess was probably Windows 3.0 at the time, and it ran so slow you could watch it draw in real time. And I thought, this thing is never going to take off. These people still have no idea what they're doing. As a Commodore guy, I always sort of resented Microsoft, because they were the guys responsible for the BASIC that was built into its Commodore computers, and it was really half-assed. And Commodore and others supply these kind of cartridges or add-on programs. You could do more sophisticated programming on those machines, and they were always way better than what was on the Commodore devices. The one that they shipped with the Amiga was particularly embarrassing. And so I always had kind of an attitude problem about Microsoft. The first thing that I would say Microsoft specific that changed my mind about the company was actually Word 6.0. It was I think it was just Office 6.0, I think is what they might have called it, the whole thing. That was the one where they started making all the applications look the same, have similar toolbars, and it was just so clearly better than any word processor that was available on the Amiga, and I remember being very impressed by that. And then I saw Windows 95, and knowing that I was going to come into the PC world, I resisted Windows. I spent a lot of time and money actually on OS2 releases, thinking that maybe this would be the future. I definitely preferred that at the time. I saw some stuff in Windows for Workgroups before Windows 95 came out that suggested these guys were onto something. That was the one that had the kind of the underpinnings of Windows 95 without the UI.
Yeah.
32-bit disk access, 32-bit memory support, and all that kind of stuff. But then I saw Windows 95. Windows 4, is what it was called at the time. So in late mid to late 1994, we got on the beta and we're working on the book. And I remember thinking, okay, this is okay. This is really good. Like, this isn't just something I can kind of apologize for and say, okay, well, it's Microsoft, but it's okay. Like, this was the one where I thought, yes, now they got it. This is a UI that looks better than the Mac. This is a UI that looks better than what the Amiga had, although the Amiga had kind of ceased to exist by that point. It wasn't just something that was going to be popular. It was something that was going to be good, and I felt comfortable with that for the first time. It was that was kind of the turning point, really. But Windows 95 was huge, right? And you remember those ads, the Start Me Up ads, with the little girl at the end and the quick moving scenes.
In every aspect, I mean, they talk about proper marketing. Talk about Apple style marketing where they convince people you need this.
It was a new age. Like, they were really. It was kind of. You almost get like a little chilly just thinking about it. You can feel it. It's like it was like inspiring. And I do think there's an important change that occurs there that has nothing to do with technology, but it's this kind of understanding that this stuff that was always kind of geeky, it was in the back room. It was like, oh, he's a geek. There was this notion that these guys were going to change the world, and that this stuff was important. It wasn't just. That's not the ad.
That's not it. No,
I don't know what that is.
I was waiting for there to be some sort
it's
of.
It's like the Start Me Up ad, which is not available in a very high quality format online for some reason. But it was a big deal, and obviously, I was very. I've always been interested in these kind of maybe too technical topics. People still believe to this day that Windows 95 was some kind of real operating system or a 32-bit operating system or something, when in fact it was really just the same thing as Windows for Workgroups. It was still based on the MS-DOS core. It was, there was a lot of work at the time by guys like Andrew Schulman and to kind of prove that and to come to an understanding of what was really going on there. And I was always fascinated by that kind of stuff. And I would say even through Windows 95 and then for the next at least few years, I was very interested in the software development part of it, whether it was MFC and the stuff going on with C++, or Delphi, which was in the VLC, which was Borland stuff, web development. IIS came around, active server pages on the IIS, allowing you to do dynamic websites and things like that. And so there was still a period of time where I was very much involved in that stuff. I wrote a lot of books about that kind of stuff. I actually was involved in some of the first dynamic websites on the internet. The SuperSite was not one of them. It's kind of weird. The SuperSite came later, but was a static website, and I did that on purpose because the SuperSite was not about something that was going to continue. It was about a flash 1 year thing. It was going to be like a quickie thing, and I sort of thought maybe I would make, like, in other words, you make like a website because you're going to have this continuing thing. But the super site, the notion of a super site was it's going to focus on this one thing, and that one thing will come and go, and maybe there'll be other super sites, and we'll have a super site for this and a super site for that. And
what other super sites would you have done? I mean, I'm just
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have trouble remembering the stuff that didn't happen, right? So I used since 1994ish or 95ish or whatever it was. I had written these newsletters that first went out through that college. And WinInfo still exists today, but it is only one of 3 that I did, and I can't remember one of them. One of them was about games. I think it was called Game Info, and then the third one, I don't even remember what it was. But
I would have loved to see the System 7 super site.
Yeah. No, it was never going to be Mac. So, but yeah, I mean, anyway, I was just, for whatever reason, I kind of latched. I saw Windows 95 and Microsoft kind of more generally as mainstream computing. Like, to me, this is where it's going to be. This is where the crowd's going to be. This is where people are going to be. This is where the interest is. This is what's going to win. And it's good, and that was kind of a bonus because the stuff they did, like I said, the stuff they did before, I was like, not so good, but it seemed like they were onto something.
Oh, I mean, also, if I remember seeing that ad, and just watching back, it just reminded me. It was the first time that I actually like thought about mobile computing.
Sure.
You know, like, wow, you could take this computer and go somewhere with it. Like, you could have these like little laptops and they look nice, and you could. I mean, Encarta, for example, was mind blowing for someone at that point. And you know what I mean? Like, it was.
Sure.
It's like, oh my god, it's interactive. Like, it's talking to me. There's videos in here.
My first my first, like laptop, I'm going to have to guess. I don't remember exactly, but I want to say it was like a Pentium 133 or something like that, or whatever it was. And it was probably, I put NT4 on it, so that was 96, so it was somewhere in that time frame. But it would have ran probably Windows 95. And I remember that the two choices were something like enough RAM or enough storage, and I chose the RAM because I wanted to run NT. And by enough, I probably mean like 2 megabytes of RAM or something. And a smaller hard drive, like a 30 megabyte hard drive or whatever it might have been. And so I could run Windows NT on it, and of course NT was not tuned for laptops, so it probably got like an hour and a half of battery life or something. But I was just so happy to have NT on it,
At this point, you said the supersite was not this; it was a
this
static
didn't exist
thing.
yet. So
it didn't exist.
Actually, it still didn't exist. I mean, so I had my website at the time was something called Internet Nexus. When info went out through there, I started working for a company that was a startup in San Francisco. Started by a guy who worked at the publishing company that did all of our education books. And he got me into dynamic web programming. He also got me to change WinInfo because the WinInfo was something I had sent out first to teachers in the CS part of Scottsdale Community College. And the reason I sent it out is because we would get these publications like InfoWorld and PC Week at the time, which became eWeek, later, and some others. And no one really seemed to read them. They would pass them around the department. And so I would read them, and then I would write this little newsletter where I would quote from the stories in these publications, and then I would write a little blurb at the end where I was like, here's a quote from it, and I'd say, well, here's what's important about this. This is why you need to know about this. And they liked it so much they wanted to give it to their students, and so we put it on like a listserv. A friend of mine, actually, Joe, did this, and I'm still friends with this guy. And he put it on a listserv, and eventually it became like, well, if we can put it out on a listserv, we can give it to anybody. I mean, why don't we let anyone who's comes in the computer lab, they can sign up for this newsletter and they can get it. And I said, sure, And then people would come in and say, wow, this newsletter is really cool. I mean, what if I have a friend who wants to get this, but they're not part of the college? Can they get the newsletter too? And it was like, yeah, actually, I don't see any reason why we can't do that. And it kind of expanded beyond that. But when I got the job at this company, this guy, Adam, who's running this, formerly from the publishing company, he said, we can't publish a blurb that someone else has written in another publication. That's like plagiarism.
Yeah.
Or as we would call it today, blogging. Right?
Yeah, well.
I mean, so he said, you're going to have to write this yourself. He says, the important part is not that stupid thing that you're quoting. It's what you say at the end. You have this way of pulling out the thing that's important about it. So don't forget the thing you're quoting. Just say, here's what's happening, and this is why it's important. And I thought, this sounds like a lot of work. Like, am I going to do this every day? Like, this is crazy, So 20 years later, almost, I guess 18 years later, whatever it is, I still write it every day. I mean, so that, that was something that kind of came out of that.
When you started with blogging and doing your website, did you kind of envision that, okay, this is going to become mainstream, like more and more people are going to start using this, and regular people, this is going to be a thing for regular people. Everybody's going to have the internet.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was always writing about something very specific. So I didn't think that Bob and Bessie down the street would be interested, but I figured the audience for this would always be bigger. I mean, there's a lot of things we're not hitting on because I don't remember them in time to mention them or whatever, but a lot of things happened on the periphery of this story that are relevant to that because, when I moved to Phoenix, we didn't have high-speed internet. We had modems, and I would connect to this programmer's BBS that was down in Tempe or somewhere near Phoenix, and you had some amount of time to be on that thing, and so you could download stuff, but then your time would run out, and it would pause. And then tomorrow comes, and your time would reset, and you could download more. And I would download games that would take 3 or 4 days, and then you'd run it, and it would be a piece of crap, and you'd be like, "That's week was shot, and I'll try again." By the time the listserv happened, and we had these public websites, I mean, it was pretty clear everyone was going to get on the internet. So I didn't think I was going to reach the world. Well, I mean, I was never going to reach mainstream people. I mean, I was, I'm writing about Windows, I'm writing about Microsoft technologies, whatever. But from around the world, and actually, we're never going to be able to finish all these stories. But I just, as sort of, we might have talked about this between the two of us at some point. Somewhere in the same time period, in the mid '90s, I was down at a flea market in Arizona, and I came across these mint copies of unopened, still shrink-wrapped video games for the Intellivision and for the Atari, for ColecoVision, that some of which had never been released, to my knowledge. And they were in boxes, huge boxes of them. And I said to the guy, "What is this stuff? What are you doing with this?" And he said, "Oh," he goes, "there was some video game company that went out of business, and they had these things in boxes. I bought them for nothing, and I tried to sell them at this flea market, but no one ever wants any of them." And I said, "Well, why don't you let me buy them at some kind of a discount? I'll sell them online, and I'll sell them. I'll buy a bunch of them."
Yeah.
I made so much money doing this. And in fact, I made so much money, he eventually cut me off because I would come back every weekend and buy a box. And so he would want like $2 a piece for the cartridges, and I'd get them for $1 a piece. But I could sell them online for like 10 or 20 bucks because I would go on AOL at the time, which was sort of like Usenet, and offer these things for sale. And so if you were like Bob in New Jersey, and you see that this guy in Arizona has a mint, unboxed, open, a never open copy of some game that was never released, like out in the world, that you want, you would pay 20 bucks for that.
Yeah, sure.
Or 10 bucks or whatever it was. They would buy two so they could open one and play it and have one they would keep. And so after doing this for a while, he finally realized, wait a minute, there's a business occurring here that, I could be part of, and he kind of cut me off. But that was my first experience with like the global reach of this, where, wherever you may live, you can go to a store like a flea market or whatever it is, and you may make some find. But when you're on the internet, you have the ability to see into anywhere and find the thing you want. So you could apply that to anything, right? If you need a new fender for your 72 Super Beetle, or you need some rare kind of tea that you can't buy locally. I'm trying to make up examples, whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be technology. The internet is what opens up that kind of stuff.
Do you, now kind of, looking forward, do you think it's a little silly when people, I mean, still to this day, I encounter people like, "Oh no, I don't buy anything online. I don't trust it."
Oh, those people are ludicrous.
I mean, still, like,
no. In fact, I might have told. Unfortunately, I'm at the point where I'm just telling the same stories all the time now. But
don't worry, I do that every day.
Years and years ago, I visited my father, the same guy who I moved out to be with in New Mexico, and then later stayed in his home for a little while in Arizona. He was living in Pennsylvania at the time. He wanted me to help him to buy a Dell computer, and so we sat down in front of his, or in front of probably my computer actually, and got online. Went through that little configurator tool, added all the little components, whatever the thing was at the end. And then I said, "Okay, now just go grab your credit card and we'll finish this thing up." And he goes, "Well, I'm not going to give him my credit card information. Are you crazy?" I said, "Well, how do you intend to pay for this?" And he said, "Well, I'll call him on the phone." And I'm like, "Dad, like seriously?"
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Because he was like, "Well, how do I know this is really them?" I'm like, "It's Dell, Dad. This is not Bob's computer. It's Dell."
Yeah.
But I said, let me ask you something. You eat out all the time. You're a businessman and all that kind of stuff. I said, you hand your American Express card to people in restaurants all the time, don't you? And he says, yeah. I said, well, when they take your credit card out back, how do you know they're not buying computers with it? You don't know what they're doing. You trust those people. You don't trust Dell? I'm like, really? And so he's like, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. So he bought the computer, Yeah, I mean, it's just normal stuff. I mean,
How did you process? Like, how did you do payments and stuff when you were doing it? Were you doing like checks when you were selling the games?
Oh yeah, no. So they would send me a check. Yeah, they would send me checks in the mail. That's what I mean. So it's kind of the nascent. Today, like this week, Raphael and I have been working on getting our website going for the new book that we're going to sell directly to people, and we're going to, I'm working on it now. We're going to take PayPal. You know what I mean? Like a normal. We're going to pay taxes. We're going to. It's like a completely different world. This is related. I mean, in whatever year Doom came out, the game Doom, it was published through Apogee or whatever that was as a shareware game, which you could get for free. But if you wanted to buy it, you had to send a check to Mesquite, Texas, and they would ship you back floppy disks. and then you owned the game, and that's how you did it. You got episode 1 for free, and then you wrote them a check, and you sent it in the mail, right? And now, whenever the next id Software game comes out on the Xbox One, I'll be able to make a digital download of this 9 gigabyte monstrosity or whatever it is, pay through a credit card that's associated with my Microsoft account. You can kind of see it. All of this stuff has changed, but it's kind of a logical progression.
It's unbelievable to me. It really is. Yeah. So here's the issue now that we're facing. We are nowhere near completing this interview, but we are out of time.
Right.
Do we?
Let me just wrap it up.
Well, no. Do we do a 2-parter?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't know if I want to talk about myself for that long. I mean, I guess we can, of course, but I mean, I just
think we should. I think we should do a second part to this.
Okay.
I think we should. Because there's so much. I mean, there's so much to talk about. I mean, and it's fascinating.
So we've not gotten. So I've not yet created the super site.
No, we're in 1995. Things are happening, Paul. Exciting things.
Let me end it on one anecdote. Okay. I told the story the other night. When I spoke in Boston a few weeks ago. After I did all that stuff through the publishing company with Gary, and I moved on to this new site and Internet Nexus, which was through a company that doesn't exist anymore called Big Tent. I attended a Microsoft event, which, by the way, back in the day, you could do by going to a movie theater and they would broadcast it over satellite. And I sat in the movie theater and I watched it like I was there, and I took notes. And they were talking about how for Windows 98, or whatever the next version was going to be, maybe it was even Windows 95 OSR 2 or whatever they were doing. They were going to update Windows 95. The toolbars in Windows 95 and the toolbars in Office 95 they had boxes around each of the icons, and so each of the buttons was like this little, there's a square.
And it was like indented in, right?
It would appear to go in. And so they were like, we were pretty happy with that. We had this 3D effect, but for the next version, what we're going to do is we're going to flatten it out. And they called it they were changing it from a toolbar to a command bar, and they said we're going to make this effect in Internet Explorer. We're going to make this effect in Windows Explorer, and it's just going to be a flatter, more modern look. And so I put on the Internet Nexus. I took a screenshot of I think IE2 or something, or IE1, I don't know. And I used Microsoft Paint to erase the lines around the buttons. And I published it, and I said, this is what Windows 98 is going to look like, or Windows 95 or whatever it was. And I got a cease and desist letter in the mail from Microsoft. They told me that I had stolen code of theirs, and I had published a picture of it on the internet, and that I would have to stop doing that. So it was interesting. I talked to a guy from the Internet Explorer team on the phone, and I explained what happened, and we laughed about it. And he goes, you seem like you're an okay guy. Why don't we get you going on the beta program, and you can kind of be in that thing officially. And sorry about that. It's a misunderstanding.
Did that also hold you back from kind of talking about the products because you've probably signed an NDA?
I don't remember. It was a long time ago. I mean, but what it did was establish a kind of official channel. Yeah. Because the guys that were in there were guys from PC Magazine and PC World and whatever I don't remember was there at the time. Byte Magazine was
major publications, yeah.
And then me, and then I was in there. So we were in CompuServe, and we'd chat to each other about stuff. And I was like, oh, look, I'm part of the club. and all it took was a cease and desist order.
That's all it took. I think that's a great cliffhanger for part 1. I didn't intend on this being a 2-parter, guys, but there's so much information here, and it's such a vast career, Paul. We just got into
a vast career.
It's a vast career.
As my son would explain it, not bad for a guy who sits in his office and plays video games all day long.
No, not bad at all. Not bad at all.
He would like to assist me in this endeavor.
I think that's
great.
But
I don't think he understands.
Listen, he could have a career in internet broadcasting because of what I do all day and what you do, I do far less. And it's become some sort of career.
Sure.
2 things before we wrap up. One, I did order the Nokia 520.
Yeah, I heard this.
And I got it. I ordered it on Amazon. I got it. And the thing was a dud. It would not start.
Are you sure it's broken?
I tried for like 3 hours.
I would leave it plugged in.
I sent it back already. They're sending a new one. I should have one.
Because, okay.
I don't know what it was. I mean, I plugged it in. I held down the buttons. I Googled, how to get this thing to start. There was just no power going to it. There was nothing.
Bringing mine on my trip. This is look how cute it is.
Oh, look at him. Oh,
it's so cute.
It's cute.
It's like a phone, but it's mini.
So I'll have mine next week, and if we have enough time, I'll do like a little review of it. Also, if you want to support the GFQ Network, you want to help us out, if you want to help us out whenever we need to get an upgrade, there's a lot of wires here and a lot of headphones and microphones that we need to constantly swap out. You could use our Amazon link by going to gfq.co/Amazon. That's gfq.co/Amazon, or on our website at GFQ Network. You can just click on the Amazon link, and we get a little tiny portion of that sale, and it helps us out, do all our upgrades. WinSuperside.com for all things Paul Thurrott. You could also subscribe to us, guys. It's a huge help when you do subscribe to the podcast. It lets our advertisers know who's listening and how many people are listening, so we keep them coming. So next week, part 2 of this interview with Paul Thurrott. I hope you guys enjoyed it, because I did. I could listen to Paul talk all week, and literally an entire week, 7 days. Just keep talking, just nonstop. You can filibuster here on the GFQ Network. It doesn't matter. And we'll see you all next week, guys. Take care.